Hello, everybody, and welcome to part 2 of SFI's annual Symposium event. Again, this year's theme is Seen, Heard, and Empowered. We are so grateful to folks for joining us after we had our part 1 last month, which was a great discussion. You're in for a good treat. We've got an awesome lineup today as well. I'm just going to quickly give an outline about how today's events will go, and then I will hand it off to Brandy, who will give us some framing remarks for today's conversation. So today, like I said, we've got a great lineup of speakers. We are going to be hearing from 3 external guest speakers. We've got Peter De Jesus, who's the newest Secure Families Board member. We've got Ava Tara Smith-Garrington, who's a lawyer at the Legal Defense Fund. And we have Valencia Richardson, a lawyer at Campaign Legal Center. Today, the kind of theme that is drawing all of these speakers together, we're going to continue the conversation talking about rights that we are entitled to by virtue of our identities as being connected to the military. But we're also going to start talking about what options are available to us to pursue recourse when we find ourselves in situations where those rights are not being fully realized. And so that is going to be kind of the common theme throughout, and it's going to be awesome. And we're going to be joined by a few different SFI team members who are going to help facilitate today's conversations. One last logistics note for me before we kick it off. I just wanted to say, if you're watching this live, if you have any questions for us or for our guest speakers, you are welcome to put them in the comment section of this video. I make no promises as to whether we will have enough time to look at the questions as they come in, just because we've already prepared such a robust conversation. But at very least, even if we are not able to answer any questions live, we will make sure to follow up with folks afterward to keep the conversation going. So with that welcome, with that outline, and with that one point of logistical administration, Brandy, would you like to give us some framing remarks for this morning?
Yes, thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you everyone who's joining us today. At SFI, we like to remember Martin Luther King Jr., and he always told us that the time is always right to do what's right. This includes fixing systems that exhaust, erase, and economically disempower military families. And this is really what we're here to talk about today. So I am excited, and I hope that we all are learning together as we discover new topics that maybe we haven't talked about before as military families.
That's right. We're breaking down taboos, right? And we're making what can sometimes be kitchen table conversations more community ones. Thank you, Brandy.
Thank you, Sarah.
All right, with that, I would like to introduce our first SFI staff member who's going to be the moderator for our first speaker and introduce our first guest speaker. So Rebecca Nowacek, if you can be added to front center stage, that would be wonderful. Hey, Rebecca, take it away.
Hey, well, I'm excited to. So our next speaker understands power, who has it and who is denied it. Peter De Jesus is a labor leader and Secure Families Board member who will help us unpack how military spouses experience a unique form of economic inequity and how that limits our access to rights. Yay. Hey, Peter, how are you?
Hey, Rebecca, how are you?
Good, good. Welcome. Can you start off by introducing yourself, your military connection, your professional background, and what drew you to serving on our board?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, nice to see you. Thank you for the invite. As Rebecca stated, my name is Peter De Jesus Jr. and professionally I had the honor and privilege of serving as the political coordinator for 1199 SEIU, which is the country's largest labor union. In that capacity, I worked to build power, advance public policy, and advocate for economic justice amongst the members we represented. I also had the privilege of serving as the president of the Western New York Area Labor Federation, AFL-CIO, which is an umbrella organization that encompasses about 135 affiliated unions and about 130,000 members across the Western New York region. What drew me to the board of the Secure Families Initiative is the deep alignment between its mission and the values that guide my work in the labor movement. Those are dignity, opportunity, and a voice for families whose sacrifices often go unseen. While my connection, I believe, is not through direct military service. I am a proud father of an Army reservist. I deeply respect the sacrifices that military families make, and I see their experiences of military spouses and families as fundamentally connected to kind of the broader fight for economic and social justice.
I love that. That resonates with me so deeply being here. I want to start off just by asking that so many of us are familiar, right, with the military spouse unemployment rate and how consistently high it's been for years. And not only is mil spouse unemployment something that's often caused or exasperated by the unique structures of military life, which, as we know, often limit a spouse's working options and protections. But high unemployment also has the tragic outcome of economic insecurity for many military spouses, which, limits rights even further. And so I'm curious, in your experience, if you could reflect on this structural spiral and help us understand why military spouse issues are not just national security issues like we talk about often, but are also labor and economic justice issues as well.
Absolutely. What a critical question, right? So I think it's important to recognize that military spouses unemployment is not simply, like you said, an unfortunate side effect of military life. It's actually a structural issue, right? Frequent relocations, licensing barriers from state to state. We talk about the inconsistencies of access to childcare, right? And employer biases that all create this kind of condition that makes stable employment, incredibly difficult for military spouses. And let's not kid ourselves; those systems are often kind of force highly capable people out of the workforce or into jobs that are far below their qualifications. Right? This is why we have to begin to view these as both national security and also a labor justice issue. In my capacity as when I was a labor leader, we fought for the right of to work with dignity, earn a fair living, and build law and economic security. That's all everyone's asking for, right? But when military spouses are repeatedly denied those opportunities because of the systems outside of their control, that is an economic injustice. So it impacts, let's talk about some of the impacts that these kind of structural barriers have, these structural issues, right? It impacts income, retirement savings, their ability for career advancement, and untimely and personal autonomy, right? You talk about the economic instability that can go, also deepen the vulnerability between households, which is why to me, this issue is so much larger than statistics alone.
Yeah, I really appreciate you saying that too, because that all compounds into generational wealth inequity, right?
Absolutely.
And I think, you know, my experience working alongside and adjacent to those in the labor movement, that was something that I just had so much respect for folks fighting for, because it wasn't necessarily fighting for, you know, one person's paycheck, right? Or one person's living conditions and equity for that one person. It was always about solidarity and collective action, and how that collective action allows us um, to have a better ability to build generational wealth and community wealth. And so I appreciate you laying that out and talking about that structural inequity. Um, I do also want to talk about inequity in caregiving and caretaking, and how that's perceived specifically. You did a tremendous amount of work and being in a leadership position in a union that represents paid caregivers and paid caretakers, right? In organizing to better living conditions for that workforce. In military civilian marriages, a high amount of caregiving work often falls right to the civilian spouse. And this can happen when the couple has children. The service member's job has less flexibility to help with childcare, but it can also happen if the service member returns from service with injuries, that require caregiving support from their spouse. And so I'm curious if you could reflect on, what is the career impact, and thus, as you mentioned, right, this financial impact that taking on unpaid caregiving work has spouses, that impact that has on spouses who do so.
Yeah, so this is one of the most important, I believe, and often invisible issues facing not only military spouses but working families across this country. In many military slash civilian households, the civilian spouse becomes kind of the primary caregiver, whatever that means for caring for the children during deployments or supporting a service member returning home with injuries and long-term health needs. Right,
Yeah.
that unpaid labor has a real economic cost. When someone steps away from the workforce to provide care, they are often losing wages. They're losing benefits. They're losing opportunities for promotion. And they're also losing kind of that long-term retirement contribution. So when we talk about financial security, they're giving that up to serve, right? To sacrifice, to take care of. So over time, those gaps compound and they have a lasting financial consequence. From a labor perspective, caregiving is work, and it's work that is essential, right? Yet too often it is unpaid, unsupported, and quite frankly, unrecognized within our economic systems. So if we're going to be serious about economic justice, we have to talk about how unpaid caregiving impacts career trajectories, right, and financial security, especially for military spouses who are often carrying that burden that is unseen.
Yeah, I'm literally unpaid and unrecognized.
That's it. I mean, that's the reality of it, right? It's I think one of the most crucial issues that we have right now facing the workforce is this kind of invisible issue of unpaid caregiving that is happening. I mean, more and more people are being forced to provide care because they can't afford it. They can't
Yeah.
afford to send their loved one to receive the necessary care. So
Yeah, and I we have so many conversations too about services provided, right, to veterans, without the recognition that the spouse is usually the first line, right? And
yeah,
so by skipping over that, that just furthers this inequity. You know,
absolutely, absolutely. Many times the spouse is the one that's standing in the gap,
yeah,
right?
exactly.
Keeping the kind of foundation stable,
Yeah,
and that's something that we don't recognize.
yeah, yeah. And I would love to talk about what do we do, and if we can learn from history here, because in the U.S. labor movement, right, there's a history of spouses and family members advocating uh, on their workers' behalf and for workers' behalves, right? Especially when workers are prohibited from advocating directly from themselves. I have, so much as right, personal stories here. I grew up in a family like this, and so I deeply appreciate learning from movement history and labor history because I think so often those stories are untold and unseen, and we do a lot of work here at SFI to try to raise those stories up. So, are there examples of that that you could share from movement history, and if you could draw some parallels between those examples and what SFI does in terms of organizing military spouses and family members, that we can draw some inspiration from?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the things that drew me the most to this board is the intersectionality between the work that I did in the labor movement and the work that we are doing here. So I would say, one of the strongest historical parallels comes from, for me, was the Flint sit-down strike.
Mm.
Right during that strike, auto workers occupied the General Motors plant in Flint, Michigan, for more than 40 days, and simply demanding union recognition and better working conditions. Right, but what made that movement powerful wasn't only what happened inside of the factories. Right, it was the spouses and family members who played a tremendous role, right, outside of these factories, right? They were organizing food drives, building community support, right? They were managing communications between those inside fighting for their labor rights and the outside. And they were also critical in sustaining kind of that public pressure that was needed to bring about the change. So that history reminds us that movements are often carried not only by the workers themselves, but by their families and their communities who stand with them. Right? That's where I see the strong parallel to the work of the Secure Family Initiative, right? That's the work that we do. Active duty service members often face limitations, right, on how they can directly and publicly advocate. So guess who that falls on? It's up to spouses. It's up to family members, right? Who frequently become kind of the organizing force and the public voice for the issues affecting military households. So, like the families who stood for workers in Flint, military spouses today are turning their personal sacrifices into collective advocacy and a lasting policy change. Right? That's how we bridge that gap. That's how we use history, right, and struggles of our past to build the future that we need now. Right? So it's there's so many parallels, but the Flint, Michigan strike is the one for me to where it was all about the public campaign. It was about the work that when we talk about those invisible ones that are standing in the gap, it's the work that they did outside of that struggle, right? Outside of that collective action that actually brought about the change, the building of the pressure, connecting the issue between the community and those workers, right? And how you can't have one without the other. They're not two separate entities. It's the same thing, right? When that worker goes home, the issues that they face inside the facility are still with them and vice versa. When they go to work, whatever they are facing in their community is still there. It's the same thing for our military families, right? The issues don't stop when they get deployed or they come home. They're still there, and we need to find ways to support them.
Peter, I love that. I love that you also brought up that strike specifically, because I think that what I know about that that action and that organizing that was happening in Flint was set the conditions for negotiations for the majority of the auto industry in the United
Yeah.
States. And so my personal tie to this is, so my stepfather was a Korean War veteran, and when he returned, he ended up working at an auto plant. So he was an auto worker for the majority for the rest of his career after service. And if those conditions didn't change in the early, I think that strike was the 30s, right?
30s, yeah.
If that didn't happen, fast forward to, my family, we wouldn't have had the opportunities and the economic stability if it weren't for those workers and families who I believe sometimes even fought death, like they were facing death in some cases, to try to get conditions changed in the workplace. And so I think I love this story, and I think to be able to continue that intention of service now, specifically around how are we actually building real wealth for our people and our communities in this moment, is something that's really inspiring. So thank you for sharing that story.
No, absolutely, absolutely. Thank you for sharing your story, right? That's exactly why we do what we do. It's creating that generational change, right? Because my story is no different than yours, right? My grandfather worked in the steel mills. He worked on the train yards, and that changed the economic outlook for our families. And it was because people advocated and fought and believed in that, we're able to stand on that solid foundation. So thank you for sharing that.
Thanks, Peter.
Thank you both so much. That was incredible. I wish I had a bunch of fire emojis that I could just put under my vision right now, because that's how I wanted to respond to that. Thank you so much. I think anytime that we can ground ourselves in history of a bigger movement that we were all part of, and anytime that we can put our personal stories into that movement trajectory and that legacy, it is just profound, and it drives. Brady, you on our team are the one always reminding us to do this, because it can give us grounding, it can give us inspiration, it can give us wisdom. And so, yeah, I know that was really, really powerful. Well, Brandy, you and I are chiming in here because we're going to help pivot our conversation. So we've been talking about movement and organizing as one of the ways that we can recognize when rights are falling short of where they ought to be, and start to formulate our path toward recourse. And you and I are the pivot point, because we're going to talk about one of the ways where that organizing can be channeled. We're going to talk about Congress. So I think a lot of military spouses may not realize how Congress is one of the most important tools available to us. And that's especially true when we have connection to the military as an institution. Because as an institution, right, the military is structured intentionally to take orders from civilian leadership. That's one of the kind of sacred foundations of our system. It's also an institution that rarely behaves proactively, shall we say. It is aimed at complying with the letter of the law as written. And so sometimes that does result in there being gaps between where things should be in terms of safety outcomes for families and how the lived experience ends up looking. And how do you bridge that gap? Well, we need Congress often in order to kind of either exert influence to make sure that the letter of the law is being implemented correctly. So sometimes it's an implementation problem, but sometimes it's a sign that the laws themselves need to change, that there's a gap in existing policy that needs to be plugged. And so we wanted to talk about Congress as a powerful tool. And so when you find yourself recognizing like, hey, my rights are not being fulfilled. One of the way you have a decision to make, right? You can kind of ask yourself, is my issue due to a gap in existing policies and protections, or are the policies and protections in place, they're just not being implemented properly? And so it's that first one, when there's a gap in policy or law, where we talk about advocacy, right? The kind of the change-making force that is way more effective when you have a base and a membership and an organizing power, because you can enter the offices of decision makers to say, hey, there's this problem and there's nothing on the books that would have prevented this from happening. And so we need to change the books. We need to change it and make sure that there is a new process or a new security in place to make sure the next generation of military families doesn't have to go through what I had to go through. So that's the kind of law changing advocacy. That's what we do every day, year round here at SFI. We do it with our members because that is what gives us that kind of people power that makes sure that we have to be heard. But then sometimes, Brandy, as you've discovered firsthand, sometimes there are things that are on the books, right? But they're just not making their way to your family. And so there's another way that you can leverage the power of Congress, and that's by opening an inquiry. Or simply, there's another term that's a little less intimidating sounding than congressional inquiry, and it's constituent casework. So, right, you are able to go to your elected representative and say, hey, I'm a constituent, I need your help. And sometimes that federal office, if they decide to engage, sometimes if they can make sure that implementation looks a bit better. So Brandy, would you mind sharing? I know this is a very personal kind of topic and process, but you have had the courage and insights to pursue congressional inquiries in the past. And I would love for folks who are watching to hear more about what that was like.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sarah. And I'm excited to share with you all, because I know when I found myself in a situation where I was kind of trying to decide, okay, there's a problem at hand. I'm going through all of the things that I know, like as far as contacting people, but this doesn't still seem to be reaching like the issue that I'm having with my family. So it was really a wonderful, like, a person who reached out to me after seeing like photos of our family and like me sharing like more about our story. At that time, it was the mayor of our local town that we were living in. And he was like, you know what? You can open a congressional inquiry to talk about this issue with the congressman. And I thought, well, I'm so confused because I didn't know that this was something that would be on like that level, like a congressional level. Also, I wasn't like necessarily, because we were stationed in the area, I didn't really know if that was my representative. So that was also so helpful for the mayor to tell me like, oh, absolutely, that is your representative. You're here in the district. So it gave me like a really great path. And so I really appreciated that first connection to kind of get me in the right direction. And so at that time, I went in to first have a meeting with a member of Congress. That was wonderful. We talked about the issue. And then I was told to go ahead and fill out the congressional inquiry form. So that is a link that you find online. Every member of Congress has the link. You can print that document out. It's a lot. It's a lot of pages. And then from there, you add to it like your information that kind of helped you say, like, these are the things that I'm seeing and I wanted you to see. So that way you can understand where I'm at and where we are needing help for next steps. And so you turn that process and you have to hand deliver. So I hand delivered my congressional inquiry. I took a picture of that day because I was so proud. That was finally getting the ball moving on something that had been affecting our family. I believe you can also send it via mail, not email, but like traditional mail. So once the Congress member received that packet for my congressional inquiry, I was then connected with a member of their staff. And so throughout that process, that member is the person that every 30 days I would be hearing an update from. Now, just keep in mind, some issues might take longer than 30 days to resolve. But there is like, once you've implemented this congressional inquiry, there is a sense of urgency by the office. So you will definitely hear back within the 30-day realm of where we're at, what we're hearing. Mine happened to be like something that went a little longer. It went into a few years, but it's really a great tool And I recommend all of our families, if you're on installation, another way I could think of how this could be an issue that plays out. Say you're looking for the school liaison officer at your installation, and you're just like, you know what? I've called a lot of people, and I've come to the conclusion that I've heard back that we don't have that person here hired for our installation. That would be another reason to implement a congressional inquiry. So if you're calling for certain services and they're not there, and that person has not been hired for, let's say, months up to a year, sometimes that position is vacant. That would be another reason to reach out and say, hey, I needed this resource and it's not here for me. And let your member of Congress know. Because again, the funds have been allocated for those positions for that intention, so that when you do arrive, you have access to those resources. And sometimes it's just one side not sharing the information, and so that you can be that really pivotal step in the information sharing process. So think of it as a way to help yourself if you have an issue. Also, it can help your whole community. So I would say anyone who wants more information, please reach out to us at Secure Families Initiative. We'd love to walk you through the process if you have any questions or concerns.
That is a fantastic readout of a high-level readout of your experience, Brandy. If you want the more detailed version, you have to join our more member group calls. But no, that's really helpful. I'm glad you warned folks that it's not always the most efficient, so it can definitely have long timelines. You warned folks about the number of paperwork required sometimes. And I love what you said at the end, that yes, even if you're bringing a very personal case forward, that ultimately what you're doing is informing members of Congress that can make more systemic fixes. Can I share one more anecdote at the end? Yeah. And then I will introduce our next guest speaker, Ava Tara, moderated by Monique. So those are folks who are on standby. But if I can just close with one story. I know we're talking about Congress in this case, but there's another branch of federal government that can sometimes weigh in. And in 2015, I worked at the White House. I worked in the Office of Presidential Correspondence. And that meant that I was one of the many staffers and volunteers and interns who got to read a lot of mail that came in, sometimes physical mail, sometimes email from people all over the country. And occasionally a letter to the president became a piece of casework. You could call it a White House inquiry. And let me tell you, there were dedicated staffers in that office at that time who would chase down like detailed information. They wanted to achieve resolution for folks who might not be getting their veterans benefits correctly, or folks who had other difficulties navigating the kind of federal system. And it was one of the most rewarding parts of those White House staffers' jobs, because so often, and I think this, and I think I can say this on behalf of a lot of congressional staffers too, when your job is about maybe hopefully pushing the needle regarding legislation that maybe it'll pass this year, but maybe you have to wait multiple years and it's hard work and it's long term. When you get to make an immediate impact in one person's life, right, that makes a lifelong impact, it is sometimes more gratifying and sometimes more within your control. And so I guess I'm just adding that layer of experience from the inquiry side, even though I wasn't in Congress doing that, but I saw what it looked like in the White House side at the time that I was in that building, just to say that you're not bothering people. In other words, you may be giving, whether it's a congressional staffer or another member of our federal government, the opportunity to kind of get their hands dirty in something very personal and specific. And often that is the favorite part of our jobs. So I don't know if that's like one final piece of, take it and use it with force, but I was hoping that could encourage folks. So
I love it. Thank you so much, Sarah, for sharing that. And thank you, everyone. Again, if you have questions or any feedback, please send it in the chat or via email to us over here at Secure Families Initiative.
Absolutely. All right, with that, we're going to continue the conversation about what we do when rights are not being fully actualized. And of this part 2 symposium, so this is really the closing act, y'all. We're going to have one more guest speaker. Valencia Richardson has joined us from Campaign Legal Center. I'm going to have Valencia join shortly. And Cassie Hernandez is going to be the member of SFI staff who is going to moderate this Q&A section. And then at the very end, Brandy and I will hop on here one more time and we will give some closing remarks. So one final reminder, if you have any, if you're participating live and if you have any questions, you're welcome to stick them in the comments. I have been seeing some pop up here and there, which is awesome. Just one final invitation if we have time. So with that, I'm going to invite Cassie to join the stage and Valencia. Hi, y'all.
Hello.
Hello, hello. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Valencia, for joining us. Our final speaker will continue the conversation regarding civil rights and litigation strategies. Valencia is one of the badass lawyers who works at Campaign Legal Center. For folks who don't know, when SFI talks about getting involved, strategic litigation related to voting rights, 9 times out of 10, Campaign Legal Center, or CLC, are our lawyers for that case. That's because CLC has been an awesome team to work with and is tackling so many pressing issues. So I have some questions here prepared for you, Valencia, that we want to ask and hope that you can share some insight. Valencia, can you share about CLC, what issues CLC focuses on, and what role CLC plays in the broader voting legal landscape, and how that makes for a very hectic travel schedule for you and your work coworkers?
Absolutely. And thank you so much, Cassie, for that introduction. I'll just start off the offset that we love working with SFI, one of our favorite clients and partners in this work. And so I'm very happy to be here and discuss sort of that partnership. CLC is a nonpartisan legal organization dedicated to solving just the wide range of problems facing American democracy. We fight and deeply believe in every American's freedom to vote and freedom to participate meaningfully. So not just the actual eligibility, but your actual ability to participate meaningfully in the democratic process. And we fight in state and federal court, particularly for Americans who have faced political barriers because of race, ethnicity, or economic status, as well as disability status. And so we fight in court to tackle anti-voter laws that target Black voters, voters of color, voters with disabilities, in our work with SFI, military and overseas voters. And we do that by advocating to restore voting rights for at the state and local level, or state and federal level. We are one of the only organizations who provide legal advocacy on behalf of Americans with past felony convictions, as well as protecting in-person voting access and voter registration. And so our work with SFI in particular has focused on the barriers to voting for people who are military and overseas voters. And so the specific barriers, especially in recent years, I would say until non-coincidentally, until not in the last 5 to 10 years, there's been more of a consensus that folks who die for our country, folks who serve our country, should be able to participate in our democracy. And we've seen rollbacks in the last half decade or so to that consensus. There's more. It's not a consensus anymore. It's more fragmented, and we know that is always going to be disproportionately borne on marginalized voters. So marginalized voters who serve and their families in particular. And so our work with SFI focuses on challenges that face military voters in particular, and especially military voters from marginalized communities. And so that includes challenges for residency challenges that we've seen crop up in states in the last couple of federal elections, challenges to residency for military voters, challenges that impede voter registration for military voters, and then at the federal level in particular, challenges like the SAVE Act, which would really harm military voters. The executive order on voting in 2024, which would have really, really harmed the ability for military voters to register and vote, and as well as challenges to mail voting currently at the Supreme Court, and challenges to birthright citizenship currently at the Supreme Court. So I think we represent. I've personally represented SFI in like six matters or something, and I'm not all of our team, so we work with so that 9 out of 10 statistic is probably accurate. It does mean we travel a lot though. I've got really great Delta status, and we travel a lot because we're all over the country every day, and we represent partners, state and local, in about 26 states or so.
Thank you so much for that. That's so amazing. And the fact that you guys are traveling, but just bringing to highlight the point that military votes matter and that we are not always in the state where we are a resident to, and our home of record is. So our voice is mattering, and being able to vote, especially to issues that are affecting us directly, is very important to military personnel, spouses, dependents everywhere. So thank you so much for that. Moving on to our next question. Can you share a little bit about the relationship between nonprofit law firms like CLC and your clients like SFI? Because it's really a partnership, right? Lawyers can't bring cases without plaintiffs, either organizational or individual.
That's 100% correct. And both as a logistical matter and as I believe as just our theory of change and how do we build movements and how do we create and how do we advocate against harmful policies. I think it's both for both reasons. From a logistical just standpoint, I'm the lawyer. I can't bring a lawsuit without a harmed party, right? And so literally need you all. As the harmed party, y'all need us to help you to speak on your behalf in court. And so this is a mutual relationship. I think sometimes as we depict the client lawyer relationship, in television as well as a little top down, but we see it as like completely mutually beneficial because we're with a shared goal of combating anti-voter policies, as well as as a part of our ethos. Our approach to our work is building those strong, lasting relationships with community partners and treating our partners and clients with the full respect and dignity that they deserve, and understanding that this work doesn't exist without your organizing. It's my job to hold the line for you all in court, but it's your job to organize and help push the needle outside of court. And we can't do that without each other, right? And so it's part of a large ecosystem of how do we what's our theory of change? Everyone has a part to play. Mine and these parts are co-equal, and that's how we treat them. And that active listening, you see a problem and you come to us, and we see if there's a legal avenue for that. And with those, we can't find the problems unless you're out there on the ground advocating. So you see those things. We don't work without each other, and I think we see that it's a lawyer-client relationship that is, I believe, a true partnership, especially with SFI, with whom we work so close, so that y'all trust. We're really grateful that y'all trust us to speak on your behalf, and we're really grateful and that y'all know that we understand these issues. Military voting is actually a very niche part of the law that not everyone understands, and so that y'all trust us to advocate on your behalf is we're truly grateful.
Thank you so much for that, because it's so monumental to have. And part of our big success is having a great team to help us to get these things in place and policies and things like to be able to speak and advocate for our military community. So I really appreciate that. So we're going to take a step back for a second. What made you, Valencia, want to pursue civil law in the first place? Like, what's your superhero origin story, if you will? What were the rights you saw being infringed upon? And how did you see the courts as an important tool for protecting them?
I sometimes joke it's my villain origin story, but I like superhero too. Superhero is probably better. But my origin story boils down to the sort of understanding that other rights and civil liberties cannot be effectuated without in a democracy, in a true multiracial democracy, which we've been promised and which we aim to achieve, cannot happen without full, meaningful participation in that democracy. You have to be able to vote. Your vote has to count in order for all other rights therefrom to really exist, frankly. And so I started that. My journey towards that understanding began when I was 18 years old. I also joke that I'm a one-trick pony because I've only done democracy work my entire adult life. I began as an organizer. I was in college and I was just registering voters, and I'm from North Louisiana, and I went to college and helped register voters, and I was doing voter registration drives, and I came across a common issue on my campus, which was that a lot of students didn't have the required identification to register to vote or vote. And so I went to my state legislature and worked with a friend to draft and pass legislation, which is effective today. That was a long time ago, but it still exists, where students in Louisiana can use their student ID as voter ID. And that process sort of unlocked for me this idea that when you are organizing to change, when you have a problem and you have a solution, you can possibly do it. That was since that success, I think the successes have become more uphill, but I believe the theory of change is still there. I think you need you need to be on the ground, and you need to work with others to solve problems that face people and prevent people from effectuating their rights. And so that led me to law school, and I have been doing voting and democracy law ever since. And I think that sort of what grounds me in this work, and this is probably why I have such an affinity and a special heart for SFI, is my organizing background. I'm a lawyer now and a litigator now, but it all comes back to organizing for me. And that sort of bug that I got from just being on the ground and seeing and working directly with people, and and appreciating that as sort of the foundation which upon all of us who advocate walk. So has sort of been the thing that grounds me through this work, is how are we doing this litigation to help the people who are doing the work on the ground. Is sort of my North Star, and why SFI is just has a special place in my heart.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. Especially the organizing background. A little story about me. I have a son who goes to Virginia Union University, and we were waiting in admissions line to drop him off. And I went, hey, they had a table, and I said, are you registered to vote? And so I'll wait here. You go vote. And it was like a chain reaction of parents sending their kids to this table and going. And I was like, you need to register because you're not home. And this is important. And you don't want to wait until last minute. And it was just monumental. And I was just it was like a little light bulb that went off in everyone's head. Hey, we're already standing in this long line. We're waiting to get all of your access to your dorm and all those things. You can literally do this while you're waiting here. We can kill two birds with one stone. So it is really amazing, and it's very important work what you're doing for sure. So to close out our event for today, I'd like to ask you about one of the cases we're working on with your team, because it really sums up a lot of the themes And in that case, it's around birthright citizenship. The Supreme Court is going to hear arguments from this case tomorrow. SFI filed an amicus brief in this case, along with two partners organizations prepared by CLC. And we'd like to know, why did CLC, a voting rights nonprofit, want to get involved in a case about citizenship? And how does this case touch on historical themes of military service for Americans of color?
Absolutely. I think, let's just start from the start. If you were born in the United States, the Constitution guarantees that you are a citizen with all the freedoms that citizenship entails. Just like I was saying, that really in a democracy, those freedoms of citizenship, including the right to vote, sort of build upon one another. And citizenship itself just unlocks that door to democratic participation and the promise of that inclusive America that we were promised with the passage of the 13th, 14th Amendments and the end of the Civil War. And we have not gotten fully. And that is what we've been chasing ever since. And so from our perspective, that is it. You have to be a citizen to get the full benefits of citizenship, including the right to vote. And a method of restricting who can vote and who can participate is by restricting who can be a citizen. And so those two things are not unrelated. In fact, they are extremely related. I think, not to go too far off, but I think it's not a coincidence that as we are seeing attacks on who can be a citizen, we are also seeing attacks on how to prove citizenship. So things like the SAVE Act, for example. So those things prove citizenship for the purpose of voting specifically. So if you're restricting who is a citizen, you are also shrinking the electorate and effectively trying to shape it in your vision rather than reflecting what this country looks like. And so that is how from our perspective, this is a foundational aspect of unlocking the right and freedom to vote. There's also a really stark connection between citizenship and military service. In the past 100 years, more than 760,000 non-citizens have enlisted and obtained U.S. citizenship through military service. Even during the Civil War, there was a union law that allowed non-citizens who enlisted to naturalize during the Civil War. The formerly enslaved people whose citizenship, the question of the citizenship for formerly enslaved people is the thing that started the Civil War. And formerly enslaved people became soldiers for the Union. The 14th Amendment, after the 13th Amendment ended slavery, the 14th Amendment granted rights of citizenship for those who were enslaved, including those who fought and died on behalf of the Union during the Civil War. And so from where I stand, the birthright citizenship case, it speaks not only directly to citizenship and voting, but also directly to the military and particularly service members of color, because service members of color historically who have fought and died in this country have also had to fight and die to gain the full benefits of citizenship. This goes back to the civil rights movement as well. Soldiers coming back home and after having fought in World War I and II, saying, wait a minute, why am I coming home to Jim Crow? And then that's how we start the civil. That is how that's how we get the civil rights movement in the 1960s, because former veterans coming home particularly from World War II, and they're like, excuse me, why am I coming back to Mississippi and risking being lynched. And so that is how we get to the civil rights movement. All of this is connected. And so the even sort of the recognition of the freedom to travel was remedying sort of the restriction of movement of enslaved people, including those who would go on to fight and die on behalf of the United States during the Civil War. And that freedom to travel is a citizenship right. So that these things are not, these things are vitally important today. And as we're seeing, sort of like at the beginning, I said there used to be a consensus at least in the last latter half of the 20th century. There was somewhat of a consensus that if you served, you deserved to be recognized. The full benefits of your service should be recognized. Yes, by your actors. And so, but what we're seeing in the really in this last administration is this idea that maybe that should be questioned, despite the 150 years of history that I just outlined about service members being directly tied to unlocking the benefits of citizenship. And so I think that the birthright citizenship case really touches on this idea that people who serve, especially Americans of color, because it's Americans of colors who our rights, who've been historically disenfranchised, deserve and in fact are entitled to the benefits for which they are fighting, and some which they will never see because they will die before those rights are fulfilled to them. And that's what happened to a lot of Union soldiers as well. Before the end of the Civil War and the enactment of the Reconstruction Amendments, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments of the Constitution, how many soldiers fought and died for the Union before they were able to see the benefits of the Reconstruction Amendments, which basically transformed this nation, fulfilled to them.
Thank you so much. It's literally history kind of repeating itself. I feel like we're kind of getting to this point now where I love the fact that you say birthright. It's your birthright. You were born automatically with a voice. You have an impact and you need to use that voice, and your vote is your voice. So thank you so much for joining us with SFI and working with us as well.
Thank you.
Hear, hear. I think everyone now realizes why it is we work so often with CLC because of the badass that you indeed are. So thank you, Valencia. And thank you, Cassie, for moderating that conversation. That was really, really amazing. All right, as we come to the close, I'm going to invite Brandy to join me on the stage just so we can help wrap up. Thank you. Thank you to Peter, to Ava Tara, to Valencia, each of you for generously giving your time and your expertise to this conversation. I was trying my best to think of high-level takeaways. There were so many, but if I can offer at least one from each speaker, I loved the affirmation, caregiving is work, full stop, right? That right there is, I don't know, all of the context it came with, of course, but that was really powerful. I loved what Ava Tara was saying about our identities don't stop at the classroom. And I think the same can be said for other institutions we enter, right? Our identities don't stop at the uniform. They don't stop at that deer's appointment when you become that dependent on your military ID card. And Valencia, I loved, as you were talking about all of the different jobs and roles that each of us have. I like to say that, this kind of advocacy and movement is like a 12-lane highway. And we're not, each one of us is not going to occupy all 12 lanes, but what's important is that we at least pick the one and we do a really good job and we find other really good people that have the other bases covered. And being able to partner with you and your team has just been the most affirming experience knowing that. So that was my attempt, Brandy, at giving a couple takeaways, but I'm sure you've got some more as well that you could summarize for us.
Oh, Sarah, it was amazing everything you covered and all of our guests today. I am still kind of processing myself. I'm in awe of all of the different issues that we were able to bring to our community and kind of say, maybe if you're thinking it's you, like, oh, I just didn't X, Y, Z, fill in the blank. Tonight, what we're doing is naming that it's not individual failures. These are systematic gaps. And when we talk about it that way, it gives us that empowerment. It can help us to have the energy to talk about empowerment gaps, economic patriarchy, institutional exhaustion. These are the things that we're all facing in our military community. But at SFI, we're trying to give language to those feelings and to the day-to-day issues that are persistent in our communities. So, awareness is the first act of resistance. And so I hope by tuning in today, hearing from our amazing speakers, that each of you go out and think of Dr. King and the Civil Rights Movement, which was led by Black Americans, created by Black Americans, which affirms the truth that military families deserve dignity, protection, and justice before, during, and after service. Thank you for, allowing us to be seen and heard. And thank you for standing in your power, everyone who spoke today and everyone who's watching here in the audience and sharing this video. This has been a labor of love for us here at SFI, and we hope that you will join us, reach out if you have any thoughts. We'd love to hear from our community. And yeah, thank you again.
Here, here. Perfect, Brandy. That was awesome. All right, everyone. Thank you so much, and we will see you next time.
Bye, everyone.